What's up, NBA fans? Dom2K on the mic, and to be honest, in around 10 minutes, it's gonna make exactly 2 months since I've been on YouTube, and that's pretty surprising for me because I have no idea how I've went 2 months and I did not make this video. The reason I'm surprised is because this subject has been a very huge pet peeve for me in terms of basketball. I never really had anybody important to discuss it with up until now, where I have about 18,000 of you. So I want to pose this question to you guys, and I want to get all angles of it because something's just not making sense to me. As you can tell from the title, what I want to know is it possible for a player in the NBA to only have been a superstar because they were on a bad team? And the reason I want to talk about this is because if you're an NBA fan, you know what the narrative around Kevin Love and Chris Bosh have been for, I don't know, probably about the last 3 or 4 or 5 years or whatever. And the big talking points around them is people have been saying that Chris Bosh and Kevin Love were never actually superstars. They only played like superstars when they were surrounded by no talent. But when they joined LeBron James's big threes, then they showed that they couldn't really hang with the other stars and that they weren't that good, and they became role players. And look, if you in the comment section can explain to me, or if you can disprove what, the case I'm about to make, I'll listen because I'm all about being unbiased, but I don't get that argument. It does not make sense. The argument is that Chris Bosh and Kevin Love couldn't produce as superstars in these big threes, but I counter that easily by saying they weren't supposed to produce like superstars when they were in those big threes. Tell you what, let's take a look at some numbers because I think that's the easiest way to discuss this. First of all, it should stick out to anybody with any good basketball sense that when you join 3 superstar players together, their numbers drop. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. When you look at the Boston Celtics in 08 when they joined Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett, and Paul Pierce, if you look at all 3 of their numbers went way down when they came together. If you don't believe me, take a look at this. Paul Pierce was averaging 25 points before that year. That went down to 19. Kevin Garnett was averaging 22 points and 12 rebounds in Minnesota. Came to Boston, that went down to 18 and 9. Ray Allen was averaging 26 points. That almost went down 10 points to 17 in his first year in Boston. Now, I say that to prove the point that when Kevin Love and Chris Bosh joined these big threes, it's a no-brainer that their points per game are going to go down because that's mainly what you're attacking. When you talk about Kevin Love and Chris Bosh, you're talking about their numbers and how much of a cut they've taken. And, if you just watch them in general, you see that they kind of play a little bit inferior to what they were in their older roles. But when I look at it, it's because that's what their older roles was. So when they were on Toronto and they were on Minnesota, Chris Bosh was going as high as 24 points and 11 rebounds a game. Kevin Love, he had some 30-30 games. He was averaging 20 points and 15 rebounds one year. He even did 26 and 13 another year. But when they went to join LeBron's big threes, those numbers went way down. As you look at Chris Bosh, he went as low as about 16 points and 7 rebounds, that's a far cry off from what he was. And Kevin Love, same thing. Even though he was averaging a double-double, 16 and 9 is pretty far away off from 26 and 13. That's the impact is pretty crazy. But when you look at it, it's not that, in my opinion, they were superstars on just because they, it's not that they were sticking out just because they were on bad teams. It's that their roles totally changed. So take Chris Bosh, for instance. When he came to Miami, he became a catch and shoot player in that offense because LeBron James, what's the one thing that you don't want LeBron James to do all game? You don't want him to drive. You don't want him to get easy buckets and ones because if you let him around the paint, he's going to score. They knew that in Miami. They drew that offense perfectly because they said, okay, well, Chris Bosh is a power forward. If we take him and keep him away from the basket, that spreads the floor because he has a mid-range that he can use. Therefore, Bosh really became a catch-and-shoot player. He started taking farther shots, and that became his role in Miami. His role on Miami was no longer to be like Toronto, and although he could shoot in Toronto, a lot of his points came from down low as well. So take a look because I have something to back that up. First off, let's look at the distance of Chris Bosh's shots because, yes, Basketball Reference is like a Bible. It even goes that in detail. The average distance in feet for Chris Bosh's shot, look at this. They were all farther in Miami. All these years right here, what is this, 5 years? They were all farther than Toronto. He has 1 year mixed in there with Toronto. So in Toronto, he was going about 8 to 9 feet. Those were really the averages of where he scored at. That went up to around 11 to 14 feet when he was in Miami. And if you just watch basketball in general, you know that Miami was when he really developed a three-point shot. He didn't use it all that much, but that's when he developed it to actually help the team out. And Bosh deserves so much respect for that because in a way, me, he kind of sacrificed his game for the better of the team. You know, instead of using all his best years to put up the monster stats, I really think he could have. He really sacrificed to be a part of what Miami was, and that's a big reason why they, you know, went to 4 straight finals. Could have had a 3-peat, but you know, that didn't go that way. Back to what I was talking about when this first started. If you organize the percent of his field goal attempts by distance, 0 to 2 feet from the basket, again, look where all those years lie. That's all from Toronto. Miami comes at the bottom because, well, he wasn't shooting as much in the paint by then. Honestly, I could go on forever with stat breakdowns of Chris Bosh's shooting and all that, but I think you get the point of what I'm trying to say by now. He simply became a different player once he became to Miami for the betterment of a team. Does that mean he was never a superstar just because in Toronto he was putting up monster stats, and then in Miami he adjusted his game so that the team could actually function better? Same thing actually happened to Kevin Love when you go and look at his percent breakdowns. Again, I don't really need to do it as much because the point pretty much remains the same with Love and Bosh. With Kevin Love, it should stick out pretty easily in your mind because everybody's had their eyes on Cleveland over these last few years, so you've seen Kevin Love shooting 3 after 3, but just in case you needed to see that in numbers, the percentage of Kevin Love's field goal attempts by distance, check this out. His 2 years in Cleveland right here, 44% in 2015-2016, 41% in 2014-2015, so it actually went up a little bit. Compare that to his years in Minnesota where that number didn't even get into the 40s. As a matter of fact, the highest was 35. Again, Kevin Love, he can really shoot the basketball, so they pretty much did the same thing. Draw the big guy out of the paint, and especially now because LeBron James' shot isn't what it used to be, give him as much space as possible, shoot the basketball, and that's exactly what Kevin Love has been doing. You rarely ever see Kevin Love banging down low anymore, and as a result, of course, his rebounds aren't like 15 and 20 like they used to be. He doesn't have those type of games anymore because he adjusted. Now, people tear Kevin Love apart for his defense and all types of other things I'm not going to get into in this video. I just wanted to really highlight how much of a sacrifice and how much of an adjustment these guys have made to their game as a part of the big threes that they joined. And again, it's just hard to fit 3 guys together who all hang around 20 shots for a game. When you put 3 superstars together and all of their field goal attempts per game are close to like 16 or 18 or 20, which is what was the case with all of these big threes, all 3 of them can't have the same number of field goal attempts. It's just not, it's not going to work. And it's not going to work in the team's best interest anyways for 3 guys to be scoring 20 or 25 a night because you really want other guys to get involved anyways. So the question I have specifically on the topic of this video is, you claim that Chris Bosh and Kevin Love can only be superstars when they're playing next to subpar talent, which I've already showed why that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if that's the case, then where are the Orlando Magic and the 76ers? Where are their superstars then? Where is their Chris Bosh and Kevin Love? You know, the Magic haven't had a superstar since Dwight Howard left them in 2012, right? Who has been the 24-12 guy on the Magic simply because there's no one else? Because in essence, that's what you're saying. You're saying that Bosh and Love, you call them role players now, and you say that they only average big numbers because they didn't play with anybody. But okay, so where are those guys for the rest of the teams in the NBA who just plain out suck? Or they're just, you know, they're mid-tier teams without a superstar. Where are those guys? Who's averaging 24-12 on the Jazz, and who's putting up, you know, 30 games on the Sixers? I don't see it. When Kevin Love and Chris Bosh were both on their own teams playing next to inferior talent, they were premier power forwards. People were saying, putting them in the top 5 in a land before time you might not remember, but let me jog your memory that yes, we did party in Miami. It was not just because Chris Bosh was an average player. It's because back then he was a top power forward in the game. He was perceived as a top power forward in the game. And my whole thing here is, if you're going to say a player is only a superstar because they're on a bad team, shouldn't that correlate with their field goal percentage? Because in essence, what you're saying is that a player who's a superstar on a bad team is only a superstar because he's taking all the shots. But if you have, look, what I'm trying to say is, what I'm getting at is, you have to have talent to be able to do what Kevin Love and Chris Bosh did, and you have to have a hell of a lot of it. So a player on a bad team who has high numbers, if it was true that they were only averaging those numbers because they had nobody else to go to, their field goal percentage would be piss poor, right? Yes, they'd be averaging like 24 points, but then their field goal percentage will be something bad like 40% or 39%, and then I could see the argument of you saying, oh yeah, well, look at that, he only averaged those numbers because he was able to take every shot and his field goal percentage sucked, so therefore it makes sense then to say that, yeah, no talent around him, he takes all the shots, so that's why his numbers look like that. Look at Chris Bosh and Kevin Love's field goal percentage when they were on Minnesota and Toronto. Kevin Love's numbers in Minnesota for all the years that he was healthy, look at this, 47%, and it was hovering around 45% basically. The only time those numbers really got bad was like, well, actually a couple of them were in Cleveland, surprisingly, and then in Minnesota when, you know, of course he was hurt that whole year. You don't take that, that's very, very skewed, so you don't look at that number. But then you go and you look at Chris Bosh's per game stats, and when you see his field goal percentage there, first of all, let's admire the fact this guy has never shot below 45% in his entire basketball career. Never below 45%. But all these years in Toronto right here, you got 47, 48, 49. So his field goal percentage is so good. You have to have talent to put up the numbers he was putting up on a good field goal percentage. Again, just to reiterate it, your field goal percentage would be piss poor if the only reason that you were averaging a lot of points is because you were taking all the shots. That's when you can make that argument. So to wrap this video up so I don't go on forever making the same points over and over again, I just don't see it. I don't see the thing of being a superstar player just because you were on a bad team. Maybe in the future it'll happen, but I do not see that argument for Kevin Love with Chris Bosh, looking at the numbers that I showed you and being somebody who actually watched them play, because I have a suspicion that a lot of people didn't watch Chris Bosh and Kevin Love before they played with LeBron James because, well, why would you? Minnesota was always injured and bad, and Chris Bosh was, you know, they never really made the playoffs. There was nobody really to draw you there except him, and I'm not sure he's the kind of player with the appeal that'll draw you like a LeBron James or a Chris Paul or somebody. So there's the video. I really want to hear your guys' arguments if you have any counter arguments to mine. If you're one of the people that say Chris Bosh and Kevin Love have shrunk in the big moment and they were never superstars because they got quote unquote exposed by playing on good teams, and I want to hear, you know, what you have to say to what I said, because I just don't see it. But I'm always willing to listen as usual. I'm Dom2K, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.